We ready? Yeah. Good evening. Welcome to today's Council on Foreign Relations meeting, Power, Partnership, and Presence, U.S. Navy Leadership. We're pleased to welcome Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus to the Council. This evening's session will focus on the Secretary's programs to reduce the Navy's reliance on fossil fuels, grow its utilization of alternative energy, and to pursue energy security in the face of global climate change. Secretary Mabus will first make a few brief remarks, then I'll ask him some questions, and then we'll give the members of the Council a chance to ask questions as well.
Great.
Mr. Secretary.
Doctor, thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. The two questions I get asked the most are, why does the Navy need as big a fleet as we have, and why in the world is the Navy worried about energy? The answer to both those questions is the thing that the Navy and Marine Corps uniquely give to this country is presence. There is no next best thing to being there. Being in the right place, not just at the right time, but all the time. So we're growing the Navy fleet after years of decline. In 2001, there were 316 ships in the U.S. Navy. By 2008, after one of the great military buildups in our history, we were down to 278 ships. In that period, those 7 years, the Navy put 41 ships under contract. Not enough to keep our fleet from declining, and not enough to keep our shipyards in business. As of last week, I've been in this job for 7 years, so it's an exact comparison. I've put 85 ships under contract in the same period with a smaller top line. And so we're going to grow the fleet. We'll have 300 ships again by 2019, and 308, which is our demonstrated need, it's our assessed need, by 2021. And the second question, why is the Secretary of the Navy and why is the U.S. Navy worried about energy, about power? And one thing is historic. We've always been on the cutting edge of energy change. We went from sail to coal in the middle of the 19th century. We went from coal to oil in the early 20th century. We pioneered the use of nuclear for propulsion in the middle of the 20th century. And every single time we did that, there were naysayers. You're trading something that's free, the wind, for something that costs money, coal. Or you're abandoning all those coaling stations around the world for oil. Or there's no way that you can make nuclear small enough and safe enough to put it in a submarine. Well, every single time the naysayers were wrong. They're wrong this time. We're doing it for several reasons. One is, and the reason we started down this path, is to be better warfighters. Energy can be used as a weapon, and it is used as a weapon. Look at what Russia did to Crimea, look at what Russia did to Ukraine, look at what Russia tried to do to Europe before the price of oil bottomed out. I did not want that used as a weapon against us. Secondly, the cost of both price shocks and supply shocks of energy, because oil is a global commodity. We don't control the price. It goes up and down, but in the first couple of years that I was there, I was presented with more than $2 billion in unbudgeted price hikes because of energy. And even in the Pentagon, finding $2 billion that's unplanned for is not an easy task. The other thing is, we were losing a Marine killed or wounded for every 50 convoys of fuel we brought into Afghanistan. And that's too high a price to pay. So in 2009, I came up with some energy goals that the biggest of which by 2020, at least half of all naval energy afloat and ashore would come from non-fossil fuel sources. We're there on our bases today. We got there by the end of 2015. Half of the power that is under contract for our bases, so more than a gigawatt, we have under contract for our bases. So we're 5 years early doing that. In the fleet, 30% now is alternative, and it's growing. We've got the Great Green Fleet at sea right now, which is the carrier's nuclear. The surface ships with it are sailing on a blend of marine diesel and biofuels. The Marines are making energy where they are with things like very small solar panels that are rollable, put it in your pack, power your GPS, power your radios with that. It saves the company of Marines 700 pounds of batteries that they don't have to carry. They're also using things like portable solar for their tents, for where they live, for all their power. Once you turn the generators off, number one, you can hear if the bad guys are sneaking up on you, and number two, you take a target off yourself because everybody knows where you are if you've got a generator going. But the second reason is climate change. As we move forward, the Navy and the Marine Corps are our first responders. So as the Arctic opens up and is ice-free now, and you've got shipping lanes, the Navy is going to be the one to maintain freedom of navigation through that. As you get contests for minerals in the Arctic, in the South China Sea, off the coast of Africa, and the Gulf of Gabon, it's U.S. Navy that is the first responder. As sea levels rise and chaos and instability follows, it's the Navy and Marine Corps. And the estimates are that in the not too distant future, 100 to 200 million people are going to be displaced by this because 70% of the world's population lives within 60 miles of the ocean. And then we have bases on the ocean. It makes sense that we do. And they're going to be threatened with rising sea levels. And so it's for a couple of reasons. One is warfighting. Two is the effects of climate change and our need to do something about it because it has a direct impact on our responsibilities. And the final thing I'll say is once you do the ships and the power to drive those ships and to get those ships where they need to be and those aircraft, we have to have the sailors and Marines to actually fly them and sail them. And so the other thing that I'm extremely proud of, and we'll, I hope, get into this more, are some of the personnel initiatives that we've taken. We were talking about it backstage. We brought Navy ROTC back to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia after an absence of 40 years. But we also brought it to Rutgers and Arizona State, the two most diverse campuses in this country. I opened up submarines and riverines to women and just opened up all ground combat positions to women because if you set standards, if you make those job related and you don't relax them, then to tell somebody you cannot do it because of the shape of your skin or because of who you love or because of the color of your skin is just wrong. And we are a stronger force because we're a more diverse force, because people with different backgrounds think differently. They bring different problem-solving skill sets. I triple paid maternity leave for sailors and Marines from 6 weeks to 18 weeks. We're opening childcare 2 hours earlier, leaving them open 2 hours later. And again, it's to make us a better force. And I think that we are much stronger today than we were a few years ago when we were excluding people because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation, and because of the color of their skin. So, again, thank y'all for being here, and I look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let's stay on the personnel side of the equation. Have the senior military staff embraced your alternative fuels and energy efficiency programs, or have you encountered resistance from them?
Well, when we first started, when I first started in 2009, we were hard pressed to find 2 flag officers that you could get to endorse this. We just did a conference on alternative energy at National Defense University. And my energy office did a film of flag officers endorsing this and talking about why it was important. And we had 2 single-space type pages of flag officers wanting to be on the record for this because they understand, because they've seen it in action. It makes us better. It makes us better warfighters. So you've got the Chief of Naval Operations, you've got the Commandant of the Marine Corps pushing for this. And as important as that is, you've also got that third-class petty officer and that Lance Corporal, because that Lance Corporal doesn't have to carry the batteries suddenly. And that Lance Corporal doesn't have to guard a fuel convoy coming into Afghanistan or Iraq. And that third-class petty officer is figuring out how to save energy on the equipment that he runs on the ship. And so it's a culture change, and it's permeated the fleet, and it's because we really are better at our jobs because of this. And they're the ones that have to do these jobs, and they're the ones that are on the tip of the spear doing it. They're the ones that see the impact the quickest.
You count nuclear power as an alternative energy source, and
I do.
That's not true in all of the U.S. states that have programs in this regard. How important do you see nuclear energy being in the future as you make this transition?
Well, we are 17% nuclear at sea. Now, all our submarines, all our carriers are nuclear. We tried it on other surface ships in the 80s, cruisers in particular. It's probably not going back there because it's just not economically feasible right now. Oil has to be over about $240 a barrel for an extended period of time to make it economic. The reason it is feasible for submarines and carriers is that it's more expensive, but it gives us a combat edge. The carriers have to be refueled every 25 years. The submarines that we're building today never have to be refueled, so you never have to take them off the line to do that. Even though it's more expensive, it gives us an edge, and I don't ever want to send sailors or Marines into a fair fight. I want them to have an edge, and I think nuclear power, particularly at sea, does that. And I'll go one step further. We're not looking at it on shore, but I do think we should. That particularly distributed, smaller things that with some of the new technology that's coming along, we can. It's much safer. It produces far less residue and nuclear waste, and it is an option that I think we should explore.
And a second alternative source are biofuel blends. Have there been any challenges in using the biofuel blends in ships and other applications?
No challenge about the fuels. I mean, we've got 3 requirements for biofuels. Number 1, it's got to be a drop-in fuel. We're not changing our engines. We're not changing how they run. So for ships and aircraft, and we've certified every single ship and aircraft on biofuels. Number 2, it can't take any land out of food production. We don't want to be competing for that. And number 3, it's got to be cost competitive. So we didn't have any challenges putting it in the fleet. Mm-hmm. I mean, the engines didn't notice a difference. The only difference we can tell is they burn a little cleaner. Mm-hmm. Engines last a little bit longer with biofuels than they do. But the challenge that we had is the first batch we bought in 2012 was a test batch. It was very small. We sent it out to proof of concept to make sure we could refuel at sea, that we could refuel air to air, to make sure that we could put it in our misnamed oilers and take it to sea. We paid $25 a gallon for that because it was a small batch and there was just no scale to it. And so we got hammered for doing that, even though first of a class, early adapters means smartphones are way more expensive than rotary dial. Computers are more expensive than typewriters, so technology sometimes is more expensive. But now that we've gotten to scale, the fuel that we bought that's now being used at sea in the Stennis Carrier Strike Group and also the carrier strike group that's in the Mediterranean right now. We paid less than $2 a gallon for that. So and it was just a normal solicitation. It wasn't biofuel companies give us your bid. It was, here's the fuel we need, and biofuels companies bid a mixture, and they were successful in doing it. So even with oil at these very low prices, it's competitive now. And so it's become the new normal.
Have our allies, navies, learned lessons from what you're doing?
They have. We've got agreements with Australia, with Chile, with Japan. We're going to refuel, and we have been refueling. I'm going in 2 weeks to Italy we're doing an exercise at sea with the Italians. We're going to refuel them with biofuels, and they've got a biofuel plant now in Venice. And Rim of the Pacific, the biggest naval exercise in the world, every 2 years. We're refueling the Japanese, we're refueling the Chileans, we're refueling the Singaporeans, we're refueling the Koreans, we're refueling the Australians with biofuels, or with a mixture of biofuels. And the first time we did it on the USS Nimitz at RIMPAC in 2012, the vice chief of the Australian Navy came over by helicopter, and we did a big press event. And somebody asked him, how committed are you to biofuels? And he said, well, they're refueling that helicopter I just came over on. I'm about to get back on it, so I'm pretty committed to this to this whole thing. And the last example I'll give you is in Singapore. There are 2 refineries. One's an oil refinery, mostly owned by the Chinese. Right down the road is a biofuel refinery owned by a Finnish company. I don't want to be completely dependent on the Chinese to refuel our ships in that part of the world. I want choice. I want to be able to go somewhere else to do it.
Makes a lot of sense. Have you found any partnerships with the private sector to be useful or not?
We've invested in 3 biofuel plants. They've got completely different feedstocks, and they're going to come online by 2017, and they'll produce about 100 million gallons a year, and they have to compete in terms of price. But airlines now most of them are flying on at least some biofuels. I mean, United has an investment in a biofuel refinery, FedEx, UPS, Virgin, Alaska, all are flying on at least a mixture of biofuels. And part of that is just, they're all in the business of making money. Europe has got carbon restrictions now, so if you're going to fly into Europe, you better lower your carbon footprint, or it's going to cost you some money. But they also sort of see the way the world is going. And as I said, these fuels, same chemical composition, and their engines don't notice the difference. And if you can create a more stably priced, homegrown source of energy, and it also gives another source of income to people like farmers, which also is important.
I know the size of the fleet's going to increase first to 300 and then to 306 surface ships. Is that creating challenges, or is that an opportunity to design new ships that really accommodate alternative fuels?
Well, as I said, we're not changing our engines at all. Now, what we are doing is becoming way more fuel efficient. We're using a lot less oil. The Navy's using 16% less than we were 7 years ago. The Marine Corps is using 60% less than it was 7 years ago. And so we've got 2 big deck amphibious ships, the USS Macon Isle and the USS America, that are hybrids, the Prius of the seas. They have an electric drive for speeds under 12 knots and regular gas turbines for speeds over 12 knots. The first time the Macon Island went out on patrol, they brought back 40% of their fuel budget, and they stayed out 44 days longer. But we're doing other stuff that's not nearly as dramatic, but has a big impact. If you change the light bulbs on a destroyer to LEDs, you save 20,000 gallons of fuel per year on that destroyer. And you don't have to change the light bulbs, but every 7 years instead of every 6 months. And it's better light. You can actually see better. We're doing stern flaps and hull coatings. We're doing voyage planning like you did with sailing ships. Go with the currents instead of against them. And so we're cutting way back. We're doing the same thing, but just using much less fuel. And our ships, while they're becoming more energy dependent, I mean, they're energy hogs now. The Zumwalt, the new destroyer that just launched, is an all-electric ship. Our new weapon systems, the railgun, the laser weapon, are very energy intensive, but we're being able to have more energy density on these ships using less fuel to do it.
And if we turn to your fixed installations in the U.S. and abroad, or is it the same strategy, renewable energy, alternative energy, energy efficiency?
Oh, we're doing all those things. And as I said, we're over a gigawatt. We're 1.1 gigawatts now. We use about 2 gigawatts a year on our shore facilities. And we've got 2 seagoing services, the Navy and the Marines, but we also own 3.5 million acres of land and 117,000 buildings. So we're pretty big on shore too. We're doing it all through public-private partnerships. We're doing it all so that private energy companies can finance this over, that it's financeable, that we do offtake contracts. Sometimes it's on our land, sometimes it's not. But we're doing it on virtually every base. And it's not just in California. It's also in my home state of Mississippi. It's in Florida. It's in Georgia. It's in the Northeast. It's all over this country. And public utilities have been some of our best partners in moving toward alternative energy. And what we're doing now is we're moving to microgrids so that if something happens to the grid, we can keep doing our military business. We can pull ourselves off the grid and continue to do the defend and protect mission that we're supposed to do.
It sounds like you're real leaders in this area. I hope others can learn from it. Let me ask one final question before I open it up to the members. You spoke earlier about rising seas and as a result of climate change, and you have bases, obviously, on the ocean. Are you thinking about how you're going to accommodate the changes in sea level and in terms of where your bases are, how they're structured, and so on?
Yeah, we're having to. I mean, Norfolk is probably the most at risk, and it's not very far from having some real problems. But we've already got the first climate refugees in the United States now. An island in Louisiana disappeared. And it was a story in the New York Times. They had to be resettled in this country. And so it's not a theoretical thing. It's not something that may happen. And you look in the Pacific, the odds are we're going to have an existential event there that we're going to lose a nation. It's going to go under, it's going to disappear. And a nation like Kiribati, which is about a meter above sea level, average. And one of the things that the president there said is that one of his main jobs is to convince people to leave, to move somewhere. Well, this ought to concern us. This ought to be a worrisome thing, and we ought to take a lot more action than we're doing. I mean, I think the president's has taken some pretty bold steps here. And one of the things the military brings is we're big enough. We can bring a market. And we also have generally been leaders in technology. I mean, the internet, GPS, flat screen TVs. A lot of our medical advances. Started in the military for military reasons, but then migrated out to the civilian world, and I think that that's happening here too.
Let me follow up on that, and then I'll open it up for questions. Do you have a dissemination program? Are you trying to disseminate what you've learned from this experience with the private sector, with utilities, with business, with the residences?
Yeah, we're completely transparent. We'll share with anybody. And one of the things that happens is if you put it on a base, it begins to migrate out. If you show it works. Like we just had the largest solicitation for electric cars in history. We've got over 50,000 non-combat vehicles. And we drive them mostly on our bases, so electric cars are pretty perfect for that. But once you get charging stations on bases and once you get charging stations near them, it begins to spread. And so we're doing it overtly, but we're also doing it just organically as well.
That's great. I'm sure you don't want a headline that says Navy brass buys $125,000 Teslas.
Yeah, you're not going to see that.
Okay, very good. Well, let me invite members to join the conversation and to raise questions. Let me remind everyone this is on the record, and we have a microphone that will come around, so you raise your hand and I'll call on you. Wait for the microphone, tell us your name, your affiliation, and as I'm sure you all know, questions have question marks at the end of them, so questions and not speeches. Thank you. Yes, in the third row.
Thank you. Very, very interesting remarks, Mr. Secretary. You brushed upon it, but almost reluctantly. I mean, the Navy was the pioneer in nuclear power. My God, it almost invented it.
Not reluctantly. If I gave that indication, it was a mistake.
It's the one source of non-fossil fuel energy that can really move the needle.
That's, I think,
I beg your
yes.
pardon. Richard Huber in Vina Wine, we produce a nuclear fuel called wine in Chile.
And we need a question.
I said, why are we unwilling to develop that source? You said 17%, should be 50% of the Navy. I mean, the Navy could be the leader in developing this source of energy. Why aren't we?
Well, I would argue that we are, in terms of most of the nuclear technology that comes out and is coming out now. Most of the research comes from our research. Now, there are differences because ours are 35-year reactors that aren't refueled. Civilian reactors are refueled on average about every 2 years. And so you've got differences. Also, a submarine doesn't take as much power as a community. But some of the technology a lot of the technology is very transferable. And as I said, one of the things that we are looking at, but we haven't gotten there yet, is distributed nuclear on bases and things like that. Not the huge plants, because in every source of energy, regardless of what it is, whether it's solar or conventional energy, it's becoming much more distributed, much more making energy exactly where you use it and storing it where you use it. And so, we're definitely not avoiding it. Right now, we can get, in terms of alternative energy for our bases, as I said, we're past 50%, and we're continuing to go doing stuff like wind and solar and geothermal and hydrothermal, which economically right now is cheaper, and it's very frankly easier, as you know.
Yes, you were second. Go ahead.
I'm Phil Hike with Ensight Corporation. There is a school that suggests that long term, and we know where we all are in the long term, Keynes put that very succinctly.
And
There's
he
a
was
school
right.
that suggests that fuel cells, a hydrogen-based economy, is something that eventually we will come to in a time frame. Now, there are a range of fuel cells. As we know, solid oxide, proton exchange membrane, there's a range of technologies. What is your focus on, what's the Navy's perspective on fuel cells as an energy source?
We've got several lines of effort on fuel cells. One is for unmanned underwater vehicles, so that there is a technology. It's still in the lab, but it's going to move out of the lab, I think, pretty soon, that you mix organic matter with seawater and you make hydrogen. And so you can send out an unmanned underwater vehicle. When it needs more power, it just sinks down to the bottom, scoops up organic material and mixes it with seawater, which there's a good bit in the ocean, and it can stay out basically indefinitely. So we're looking at that. We have been looking at fuel cells also as power for our bases and our ships, a little farther away, frankly, than some of the other technology, but certainly a promising area in the future. And I have to say, I'm pretty neutral about what sort of alternative energy you do, whether it's nuclear, whether it's fuel cell, whatever feedstock it is for biofuels, whatever, if it comes from landfill, if it comes from camelina, if it comes from used cooking oil, all of which we've bought. I don't really care. I do care about the carbon footprint, and I care about the fact that it doesn't take any land out of food production, and I care about the fact that we can get it easily. I think fuel cells have a very, very bright future. I'm not sure we're quite there in terms of the technology that we need particularly to drive things like a naval ship. Yeah.
Let me try this side. Yes. You, second row.
Hello, Mr. Secretary. I'm George Stamos, old friend. We spent 40 minutes talking about innovation, extraordinary innovation by the Navy. I might add this new weapon that you've created is also a source of great innovation that we've all been reading about this weekend. Can you speak to the relationship with the private sector, the spirit of innovation? And I know you spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley. How do you keep up that relationship with the private sector, and what role do they play in all these amazing innovations that we're hearing about?
Well, they play a critical and huge role in a lot of this. The way we try to keep up is by establishing the connections. It's also by making governmental acquisition a little bit easier, a little bit less opaque, and trying to take the fear factor out of people selling to the military or to the federal government. That's not easy, but we're doing a lot more pilot programs. We're doing a lot more proof of concept so that you don't have to jump through all the hoops to do a program of record until you see, so you succeed fast or you fail fast without dragging on for years and years and years. And so we do that. We also have great partnerships with universities, with Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins or Penn State or Purdue or Arizona State or MIT, or I can just keep listing them on and on and on, to use some of their cutting edge research. And a lot of it's funded from Naval Research Labs, from other parts of Navy or Marine Corps. And finally, the Marine Corps, twice a year, has just an open house. One time, once every 6 months at Quantico, and then the next time at 29 Palms in California. And they say, bring us your alternatives. Bring us what you're making. And that's where we got the little solar panels, the rollable solar panels. That's where we got the portable solar generators. There's a technology that spray can. You spray something on a rock, put a lead to it, and it becomes a solar panel. We didn't know about that, but somebody brought it in. And what the Marines can do is they can buy it. They can buy it on the spot. Their Expeditionary Energy Office can. And so that's one of the ways that we, just show us what you got, and maybe we'll buy it, and maybe we'll turn your small company into a much bigger company if it helps us, if we've got a need for it. And George, I don't think anybody in here, when they think of Marines, and we got two of them on the front row here, they don't think about ardent environmentalists. First thing, actually we got three of them on the front row here. But they are leading the pack in terms of that partnership with the private sector, in terms of finding what that new technology is out there. And if that technology is something that we can use, we're figuring out ways to get it quick and to keep companies from going under just trying to get into the federal system. Because Lord knows it's way too complicated. Last thing I'll say, at hearings, last couple of years, I've taken a chart, and it's about this big. And it's our acquisition process. It's the things you've got to go through. It looks like a plate of spaghetti. And it's simplified. I mean, I didn't put everything on there. I mean, that is nuts, that the way we're doing it today. We got to cut out a bunch of this. Congress has tried, and we're trying. And as I said, we're basically trying to bypass a lot of this and do pilot programs or proof of concepts. The laser weapon. I talked to the reporter who wrote the article about the railgun. I talked to him this morning. He said that the railgun was the most viewed video the Wall Street Journal had done this year. Last year, the laser that we've got out in the Arabian Gulf was the most viewed video. And the year before that, it was the X-47B, the unmanned aerial vehicle that we landed on a carrier and catapulted off. He said, just keep inventing these things. It's really helping us as a publication. That laser weapon, we sent it out in 2013 as a demonstration. It's a 30 kilowatt laser. It was supposed to be for 6 months. They just love the weapon. It's really valuable. So we're learning lessons from that. It's still a pilot, but now we're building a much larger weapon. The private sector is, having learned the lessons of what does it do in a maritime setting? What does it do in 120-degree weather? How do you keep it when it's not absolutely level, as ships tend not to be? And so learning those lessons has allowed us to succeed way faster. And so when we go to a program of record, we'll have a lot of those questions that spaghetti chart causes you to answer. We can skip big chunks of that to get more weapons like that. Same thing with the railgun. We're putting it as a test this year out to see if it works, see how it works in different environments.
I'll take another question from this side, and then I'll move back to that side. Yes.
Secretary, thank you. Masazumi Nakayama, Citigroup. To keep Navy strong and keep seamen highly motivated, what should U.S. taxpayers should do in terms of investment of their taxpayers' money? And also, what kind of points that we Americans should be careful and sensitive to the U.S. Navy?
Well, part of my job, I think, is to protect taxpayer money. And I'll give you some examples on ships. Littoral combat ship was costing about $800 million. When I came in, it's costing $350 million a ship today. We're saving $300 million per destroyer that we're building. We bought 10 Virginia-class submarines over a 5-year period. We paid for 9. You know, it's like having a punch card. Buy 9 submarines, get your 10th one free. And it's because we're doing stuff like firm fixed price contracts and multi-years and stable designs and mature technology. And so those shipyards that are building the submarines knew how many people they were going to have to hire and have over the next 5 years. We gave them some stability. They knew what materials they needed to buy for 10 submarines, and it's cheaper to buy them for 10 than it is for 1. So we've been driving down the cost. And you know, I go back to, and we haven't done it at the expense, we're building a lot more ships for less money. We haven't done it at the expense of aircraft. We're buying 35% more aircraft than we were in the previous 7 years. But I go back, and my father was maybe the cheapest human being who's ever lived. And I ran for, my first public office was state auditor, and I was campaigning in Wiggins, Mississippi. And I ran into this guy, and he looked at me, and he said, "Are you Raymond Mabus's son?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he said, "Well, I'm going to vote for you. If you're half as cheap with the state's money as your father is with his, we'll be okay." And so I'm just cheap. I mean, I want to squeeze every nickel till we get it. But the reason we need a great Navy, 90% of the world's trade travels by sea. 90%. 95% of the data, when you're looking at your smartphone, when you're on the internet, 95% of the data goes under the sea. The reason the world's economy is doing as well as it is today is the United States Navy. Because for the first time in history, for the last 70 years, we have had a dominant Navy. And we've kept the sea lanes open for everybody, not just those flying our flag or the flags of our allies, but for everybody. That's the reason the economy of the world is as strong as it is today. And so if you live in Iowa or Uganda, you know, you're completely landlocked. You're dependent on the sea. And you're dependent today on the United States Navy for freedom of navigation, for freedom of access. And we're the only people who can do it. And that's why you need a great Navy, is that presence.
Okay. Yes, young woman, right? She's had her hand up.
Hello, Mr. Secretary. My name is Cassia Janasek from McKinsey & Company. My question's actually about conventional energy, you know, and particularly natural gas. We actually have seen this huge renaissance of natural gas. We have decades of it at, you know, that can be developed at quite cheap, you know, numbers. And further, we've seen a globalization of gas, and we keep finding lots and lots of gas offshore. So I'm wondering where it fits into the Navy's strategy, particularly as you think about, you know, electrifying your fleet. Thank you.
Well, first, we can't use natural gas on our ships or our aircraft because we've got the engines. We've got most of the fleet we're going to have, and we're building to the fleet size. Our aircraft, none of it can use natural gas. I mean, it would be prohibitively expensive to go back and retrofit it. That's why we're looking for a drop-in fuel instead of something like natural gas. On our bases, we have moved to natural gas, but I don't count it as an alternative fuel. It's still got carbon. It's still a non-renewable resource. And we're finding more, and that's great. And it's cheap, and that's great. But it's also, as you pointed out, globalized. It's much more global commodity. Not as much as oil, but certainly up there. We're not now, but could be susceptible to price shocks there and supply shocks, the same way we are with oil. So I think that it is a valuable thing to use, particularly in our shore establishments. One of the ways we're using it is we're taking out some very old, very inefficient power plants on our bases and replacing them with much smaller distributed power on those bases and powering them with natural gas. But I think long term, if we're going to be better warfighters, you gotta ship in natural gas. You got to move it from one place to the other, and I think it's much more valuable to be able to make energy where you are, and it's a military advantage to being able to make energy where you are instead of having to move it any amount of distance.
You have to. Yes. You're next.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. It's Aryeh Borkoff from LionTree. Been a fascinating talk so far, so thank you. There's a lot of criticism around the dysfunctionality of government from a management perspective, but given the fact that you've been at your helm for 7 years, talk a little bit about, not just on the innovation side, but how you manage the scale of the Navy, the people, the way you structure it, the way you get through complex issues, problem solving, et cetera, and why it's different from a lot of other people's perspectives of government. Thanks.
Well, the Navy has about a $170 billion budget, Department of the Navy, 900,000 people. If we were a private company, we'd be second biggest in terms of employees, only after Walmart. We'd be third biggest in terms of assets between ExxonMobil and Berkshire Hathaway. We'd be fifth biggest in terms of budget authority. And so it's a huge organization. And one of the things I've learned in various jobs, being governor, being an ambassador, being in the private sector, being a CEO, is that if you try to just dictate, if you try to say, we're doing it this way, nothing much happens. And so you've got to give people a reason to do it. You've got to show them how it makes their jobs better or their lives better. And you've got to get complete buy-in from the folks that work with you. And it's particularly true in government because I'm a political appointee. I'm going to be gone. In fact, at the end of this administration, there are not many certainties in politics, but that's one of the certainties. This was the most requested job in the Obama administration. Whoever gets elected president next is going to have a line out the door to take this job, and it's a great job. But the military in uniform, the civilian workforce, they're not political, and they're going to be there long after you leave. So if you just try to say, do this, do that, nothing much happens. And so you've got to, you got to show them why it makes a difference. In energy, it makes a difference because it makes you better warfighters. It affects our responsibilities. Climate change affects our responsibilities. In terms of personnel management, we're an all-volunteer force. We've got to recruit and we got to keep great people. We can't do it unless we treat them right, unless we make their careers more flexible, unless we give them more say, unless we promote more on merit, less on time, for example. On things like acquisitions, you have to set up systems so that, we were spending $40 billion a year on contracts. And so we set up a system called contract courts that said every contracting officer every year has to bring in all their contracts and defend them. Do you still need it? Have you bid it out lately? What are we doing with it? These are everything from cutting the grass to building carriers. And so the first couple of years, we saved $4 billion, 10% on that, just by asking people, why are you doing this? What does it bring you? And one of the results has been that people are now bringing stuff up that they see you've got to try to change the culture. You've got to try to change the outlook. And the only way you do that is by having policies or programs that do make a difference. Not doing too many of them. I mean, the scope of the ability to change is pretty limited. I mean, I was governor of the poorest state in the nation. Every day I got up, there were about 1,000 things I could do, I think, to make life better. If I tried all 1,000, I was going to fail at each one. You got to pick 3 or 4 things and just be relentless about that. And Tom Opel is sitting here, my chief of staff, who was my communications director when I was governor. And, you know, consistent, just repetition is the key to clear communications. You just got to just do it over and over and over again and explain it over and over and over again, and not assume that just because you're inside it every day that everybody else is paying attention or cares. And that you got to do your job and explain it.
Right here, and then I'll come back to Padma.
You really answered the question about leadership, which I was going to ask. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Padma?
Thank you. How does our totally efficient naval fleet allow us in dealing with antagonistic activities such as the Chinese building islands in the waters of South China Sea? I mean, does it help us better to deal with these activities, or does it involve a military conflict? Or?
Well, the way it helps us deal with any potential adversary or anything like that is it allows us to be there. And these freedom of navigation exercises that we're doing, we're going to sail where we are allowed to under international law. We think that status quo should not be changed unilaterally or by force. And number one, by having the ships, just having the ships to be everywhere that we need to be, to do these exercises and these demonstrations everywhere. But then having the power, the energy to keep them at sea, to be everywhere, to be there when we need them to be there, and we need them to be there all the time. That makes us, it's the presence argument. That's why I started out by saying that's what we uniquely give the country. So it doesn't matter what the threat is, it doesn't matter what the issue is. Being there, there's no second best thing to being there. Ships in port in the United States don't do us much good. You have to have them, and it can't just be in one sea or one ocean. We have to have them everywhere, all the time. We're the only global Navy, and we're the only one who can do this, and we're the only one, we're the ones that people look to. And so that's why we need the number of ships, and that's why they need to be at sea.
Yes.
Me or him?
Yes, him.
Herbert Levin, council member. From the standpoint of the national well-being, is it more important that the Navy have more potent guns, or that high school graduates in Mississippi can go to MIT paid for?
Well, I don't think that's a choice we ought to make. I think you ought to do both.
Raise taxes.
Well, let me tell you something. Let me give you a statistic that's going to frighten you. It does me. 3 out of 4 Americans age 18 to 24 do not qualify for the U.S. military. 3 out of 4. Our recruiting pool is 25% of our total population. They don't qualify because they didn't finish high school. They don't qualify because of health issues, mainly obesity. They don't qualify because they've got a criminal record. We don't give any waivers. to get into the military. But that ought to frighten us. We ought to do a better job in terms of health care. We ought to do a better job in terms of education. I mean, I spent a large part of my life working on education in Mississippi. And you know, I don't care if you don't have children. I don't care if you don't have children in public schools. I don't care if your children are out of school. You've got a vested interest in making sure that our public schools are great. You just do. And I went and I made a speech to the Mississippi legislature in 2011. It's the first time I'd talked to them since I left office in 1992. I made the same speech in 2011 I did in 1992. I mean, I started out by saying, as I was saying, when I got interrupted. But, you know, every one of those legislators came up to me and said, what can we do to help the military? We want to help you. I said, okay, you want to help us? Do better in education. You want to help us? Do better in health care. You want to help us? Keep people in school and out of jail. That's the way you can help the military. So I just think that's a false choice. I think we've got to do both.
Well, on that note, the witching hour is here. We end our council meetings on time. I'd like, please give Secretary Mavis a round of applause for the fascinating discussion. And thank you all for coming. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. That was great.